Over the last 5 years, Clix has been one of the best players in Fortnite, but despite making almost every single FNCS Grand Finals, the closest he's ever been to winning was a 4th place in Chapter 5 Season 1 when he locked down the Mythic at Lavish Lair. After not being able to win, everyone thought this was the only chance he would ever have to be crowned an FNCS champion. But now, everything has changed. This season, we've seen a ton of the best players from EU come over to NA in order to qualify for the Global Championship at the end of the year. After Clix ended up dropping Epic Whale, everyone was interested to see who would play with next, and nobody expected it to be Veno. He is the best teammate Clix will ever have, already winning 2 FNCSs on EU and having over $900,000 in earnings. On top of that, he has been regarded countless times as the best player in the world. The question on everyone's mind is, will Clix actually win his first ever FNCS? And well, it's going to be much harder than you think. Before we get to that, how has their season been going so far? Well, it's been extremely good, but at first it didn't start off this way. In scrims leading up to the start of tournaments, they seemed to be somewhat all over the place with how they did. However, this was mainly due to the fact that Clix had to pretty much rewire how he thinks when playing with Veno. Small things like how he peeks to get Surge, how he's moving around during the mid game, or other little things like that. Veno will absolutely grill him for it. For too long, he's been relying on his fighting ability instead of really taking time to think about all those small things he could be doing better or changing the way he plays the game. For example, last season we saw a big reason for them not doing so well was because that they would consistently be below Storm Surge. This was mainly because Clix didn't want to carry a DMR and instead wanted to fight to get Storm Surge. And well, when it did work, they would be put in a really good spot, but more often than not, this would be a crucial reason for them going down early or being put in a really bad position. Veno isn't afraid to yell at Clix and tell him exactly what he's doing wrong, no matter how small it might seem, which again is exactly what he needs. We've already seen from the beginning of this season to now, he's already improved a lot listening to Veno. We even saw him for the first time this chapter actually carry a DMR for Surge instead of relying on fighting for it. All of these changes will lead to them playing much more consistently, and that is exactly what is needed in order to win in FNCS. Another big thing that will help with consistency is their drop spot. This time around, they decided to claim Sandy Steps, and for now, it looks like they'll be fully uncontested for the entire season. This POI is very good for pretty much everything, whether that's mats in the area, loot, heals, etc. But we'll touch more on their strats for here later on. This all sounds really good, so how has it actually been translating into tournaments? In the first duo Cash Cup, they only ended up getting a 22nd despite winning the very first game. However, this makes sense. They were still a newly formed duo and still figuring out their drop spot. You may think after that first Cash Cup they would have a much better performance in the second, but again it was quite underwhelming, this time getting a 20th. At this point, week 1 of FNCS was about to commence, and most viewers really didn't know how well they would do. But before this happened, there was about to be a massive change. During this first part of the season, Nitro Fists were a big problem for teams. Not only was fighting against them very annoying, but during the moving zones, everyone was flying through the sky. And well, Clix's chapter has become one of those players who always goes for height, and in this meta, it was simply impossible to hold it for long periods of time. However, there was a massive game-breaking bug with it, so it would end up getting vaulted, and just recently Epic has announced that it will be permanently vaulted in competitive. This meant overnight the meta completely changed, from the fists to now carrying nitro splashes. But before getting nerfed, these things were absolutely busted. However, this worked in Clix and Veno's favor. When you take height now, it is extremely hard for another team to take it back. But we'll talk about how they actually take it later on, and one of the main factors that could potentially make them completely miss out on making globals. Back to the qualifiers, nobody was surprised when they breezed through the first 3 rounds and made it into the finals. Now this is very important because over the last 2 seasons, there were no actual set lobby at the end of each qualifier week. This meant we couldn't actually see who were the best duos heading into grands. However, this time it will be a huge indicator of who could possibly win this season. By the way, if you're enjoying the video, double check that you're subscribed because only 10% of you watching actually are. With that being said, everyone was curious to see how they would play in the finals and if this new meta worked better for them. And let's just say they looked unstoppable.
I got you. Oh, hit behind me. Dead. Dead on him. I'm in zone though. Nice. Let's go.
The only way you lose now is if you get even more.
100 on that kill. Dead.
Nice. Veno.
50 on him. I'm on high. 100. 100. 95.
It's over. Let's
go.
Clix Veno went on to easily win the tournament, getting that victory royale in 3 out of the 6 games. This was a big confidence boost, yet we still couldn't say for sure how things would go on from here, and maybe this win was just a fluke. But this would quickly be proved wrong after they went on to get a 5th in the next Duo Cash Cup, then finished strong in FNCS Week 2 finals with another 5th place. With all that being said, this is the best we've ever seen him play in a season, and after doing so well, they're pretty much guaranteed into Grands already. And the strategies they use to stay so consistent in the first place will really shock you. I already stated how they are dropping at Sandy Steps, and there's a couple crucial aspects of this drop that help them play so well. Like every other top duo, they have their own separate loot routes to make their time off spawn as efficient as possible. Each of their loot routes are very simple, with Veno taking this part of the POI and Clix this part. This drop has a ton of slurp barrels and nom crates at it, which allows them to save up on any shield while they are looting. And if it couldn't get any better, there's actually a mending machine just north of them. Because of this, they will use EMPs to farm gold out of it, even if they don't need anything from it at that moment. Now, I mentioned earlier how they haven't been conned so far, however that was kind of a lie. Throughout the week 1 finals of FNCS, there were a couple games where a few teams would come in and try to take some of their loot and even straight up drop on them. Now, you would think this would hinder their performance, but it really didn't affect them. They definitely have ideas on where to go even if this happens, which is very important since it's Fortnite and stuff like this happens all the time. But the main reason I mentioned this is because it's a big factor in affecting a team's performance. However, Clix Veno already showed they can overcome it. So going into Grands, if something like this does occur, we already know they can still do well. With that all being said, this congestion only happened in the first week, and in week 2 they were actually uncontested every single game. Now you would think this would help them perform even better, however this is when they placed 5th compared to the first week where they won. And this is for one major reason. Since there were a ton of players around them week 1, they were able to get a bunch of storm surge damage early on. But now that there weren't as many teams around them, they would have to put themselves in a more aggressive position to make sure they stay above. With that all being said though, I don't think this will affect them. When the grand finals comes around, there will more than likely be a few teams to try and take some of their loot since they have claimed such a large area on the map, which will give them more opportunities to get that storm surge damage. Now everything I've gone through so far can happen at any drop spot, however Sandy Steps has something most don't. Just even more north of the mending machine, there is a forecast tower that has a 80% spawn rate. Most of the time when it spawns, they're able to get it, since like I mentioned before, they are very efficient off spawn, meaning they're always the first to get there and claim it. But if there are other teams trying to claim their loot in that area, it could hinder how quickly they are able to get there, meaning other teams could possibly take it. In fact, we saw exactly that happen during week 1, since a few teams pushed into them. I still don't think this is a huge deal though. Obviously they will perform much better knowing where next zone will be, however they were still able to win a game despite not getting it, so it's not like they only do well with it. Now we keep mentioning surge throughout this video, and that's because it is the #1 thing you need out of anything to do well in a stacked lobby. Because there are already a bunch of teams on this part of the map, whenever they do go up on this hill to claim the forecast, they automatically have a really good position to tag other players. This is also where that mending machine I mentioned comes into play. Since they have a bunch of gold, they can be more aggressive when peeking in order to secure that damage. Then when they eventually get tagged, they can buy extra big pots from there. This is where they get a bunch of their damage, and from here, since they have launch pads in this area and most of the time they get the forecast, they are able to position themselves on the dead side of zone. After this, they play very simple since they already have an advantage on every other team, and it's in the end game where they really work their magic. Now last season, Clix and Epic Whale always tried to take height within the first 2 moving zones, but this time they're doing the complete opposite. First, they try to get themselves on a good high layer in order to see what height is doing. Then they do one of 2 things. The first is by looking to see if they can shoot them out. Now if they can, they don't go for height quite yet. Doing this early on forces the team up there to burn through some of their materials in order to maintain it. If they aren't able to chop it out yet, they make sure to stay directly underneath height in order to not get damaged and also save up on materials of their own. Clix Veno continue to do this in those first few moving zones, making sure they have more builds than them. During this entire time, they're also always looking up at height to see what they're doing. but not in a way that's obvious so they don't get focused and forced down. Soon after, it's time for them to make the game-winning play, which typically happens during the last 2 moving zones. Since they have been scouting height this entire time, they can tell once the team up there starts to run low on materials. One way they are able to tell is if height is only using one build on their layer to tarp out instead of multiple. After making the call to go for it, they take it in 2 main ways. The first is by mirroring under height, then getting a chunk of damage on the opponent, then cranking up. The second way is very similar, and that's by going frontside and just chopping them out, then going for damage. However, this one is only really effective if the team has pretty much nothing left. Now, a lot of the time, even if they do get a big chunk of damage, it's still very likely that the other healthy player will try to keep it. This is where all their Zone Wars practice comes into play. Clix and Veno have been playing a ton of Zone Wars this season, and it's really translated well into game. For example, after taking height off of a Shambles team, there's a different team who also tries to take it off of them. But since they're used to being in this position already, they're able to maintain it by just cranking up and playing smart. Now, those were the main ways to take it. However, there are still some other ways that they get it, which are very situational. An example of this would be how they took height off of Peterbot and Poyo. Since they're constantly looking up at them, they see one of them go back in zone in order to get loot. This alone tells them that height isn't the most stacked, and since only one player is left, they can take it with ease. Playing height is their main game plan, however they're not able to get it all the time, which sometimes can result in bad games. But at the same time, they still have good ones just by playing mid and low ground. So if they don't get it, it's not the end of the world. But there's still the big question whether they'll win or not. And well, even Veno doesn't think they're gonna win. He said himself that if they are going to actually take home the crown, they're going to need to play perfect. That being said though, this is still the best we've ever seen Clix play, and in the most recent Duo Cash Cup, they ended up winning it with an insanely consistent match history. So even though Veno doesn't think so, if Clix is ever going to finally win an FNCS, now is the time. If you guys enjoyed the video, make sure to drop a like, subscribe, and check out these videos here. Have an amazing rest of your days. Peace out.